Hello, welcome to the Room to Write. My name is Colleen Getty, and we're shooting the Journey of a Story series today with our wonderful guest and author, Dom Capossela. Welcome, Dom.
It's really nice to be here, Colleen. Always nice to be with you.
I'm so excited to have you here. We have tons to talk about.
Well, let's go for it.
All right, so we're going to start off with the usual question I ask, and it's as a writer, for those at home to picture how real writers write, what does that look like for you? You know, where are you writing, how are you writing, and what's that process look like?
It's interesting because it evolved from pen and paper. And for years, I did pen and paper because at my age, no one wants a computer. We want pen and paper. But gradually, I've made the transition so that now I do prefer to write on my laptop. My favorite place to write is absolutely a cafe. There's no question about it. I love, because I live alone, I don't live alone, but I'm a single man. I have a daughter, and so I've been single parenting, so I'm not alone. But in terms of adult companionship, I'm often alone. So I love going out to a cafe where there are all people around me, and I don't get distracted by them. But I love to see the movement, and I love the little bit of noise, and I love the caffeine jolt that I get from the coffee. And I write, and I love it. Yeah, it's great.
All right, and so do you sit in an area that's sort of all together with people, or do you do kind of off to the side? And how much of that incorporates into writing? Do you use the people you see in your writing?
No, not the people I see, and no, nothing distracts me. When I focus, you could light firecrackers and yell and scream. I don't deviate. And the people around me, they're only fun. The girls I like because they're pretty, and the men I tolerate. But no, I like the activity, I like the action, but I'm not part of it. And I don't care if there are people squeezing me on each side, as long as my fingers can move. So I don't need to be alone. I don't want to be alone.
Right. Well, that's interesting because a lot of it's one or the other with writers.
Oh
it
yeah,
seems.
I know some people who have their TV on and they're writing with the TV going.
Right.
So no.
All right. So so you're writing in a cafe on a laptop. Is that how you wrote your first book, Dom's an Odyssey, or
No.
how did that come about?
No, those were pen and ink babies.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that book is all sorts of things, but what would you say it is mostly?
The book is structured one night at Dom's restaurant, and there are 12 chapters, and the restaurant and the book starts at 6 o'clock at night, and it goes till 6 o'clock in the morning. And it takes you through growing up in the North End. It takes you through the rock and roll industry, because that's what happened. On this particular night, I focused the night on the time that we hosted the rock group Boston. They had just come back from a year-long tour, and they had started that tour, an unknown opening band for I forget whom. And while they were on tour, their record hit in Cleveland, Ohio. No one could see it coming. And somebody in Cleveland picked it up. It was More Than a Feeling. And within weeks, it became the #1 song in America. And weeks after that, they became the hottest band. And by the time they came back to Boston, they were on top of the world. And how that's all connected to Dom's was this. Their manager had no money. And it was the night before they're going on tour, and he says to me, "Dom, I have no money, but I want to give my band a send-off." And I gave them a dinner, all of them. And it was a lavish dinner. They had everything. And I didn't charge them. And this was their payback. They were going to have their grand end of tour party at Dom's, and they did. And that's part of the 12 chapter, but that goes on because they played until midnight, so they start coming in at midnight and 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock and 4, and we could get away with it. Don't ask me why I could get away with it, but I did. We opened after hours. We had a regular dinner crowd. We were an expensive upscale restaurant, and the book is all about that night.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so I think this is a great point to sort of bring up when people say, I don't have anything to write about. I mean, obviously that's a pretty cool event, but that's literally one night in a whole lifetime of yours so far, and I'm sure you have a whole lifetime of stories to go along with it. So maybe talk a little bit about how do you pick one night to write about, or how do you go about starting a story like that? You know, for writers that don't know where to start or how to form that into a book or a cohesive segmented story. Any advice on how you started to form that?
If you fancy yourself a writer and you would like to try, sit down and write a sentence and don't think about it. For a lot of writers, and I include myself in that, once you start writing, the page talks to you. If you think about a person, think about your aunt, or think about your father, think about anyone, don't tell me you can't write a sentence about them. You can. And then see where that leads you, because it will. Suddenly you'll find that your pen can't move fast enough, which is why the laptop finally took its place in my life, because it's faster. But that's what I would do. Sit down, and if you don't have a thought, just sit down and write the first thing that comes into your mind. I don't have a thought. What the heck am I going to write about? And then something will happen. Maybe you have a cold. And how that's making you feel. I can't write today because I have a cold. And you begin. Go.
Right.
Some people have an idea. They have a person in mind they want to write about. Someone wants to write a biography. Others want memoirs. Everybody's different. Yeah.
And so this is when you own, obviously, Dom's.
Yes.
And are there recipes in there? And what part of, the tradition of eating a meal together made this significant, or could it have taken place in any other place?
Well, the restaurant is interwoven in my life. I worked as a waiter through college and law school. And then I opened a restaurant. Even though I was a lawyer, I opened a restaurant right away, and I never really practiced law. And so the restaurant is part of me. And my children were part of the restaurant, which made it all the more enmeshed in my life. And even now, when I haven't owned a restaurant for 20 years, I love going to restaurants. And I get a lot of ideas from restaurants because I know the idioms, and so I see the people play out what they have to do, all their duties, and how they perform them. And I'm very sensitive to whether they're smiling, whether there's tension going on backstage in the kitchen, and I love watching all that.
So like dinner as theater.
Yeah, and for me it is, always.
Okay, and I find that food is a big element in a lot of the writers that I talk to in their storylines or in their lives. So now we're going to sort of watch your Odyssey transforming from pen and ink, and now you're doing your blog, An Existential Auto Trip. So that's a big leap, I know. There's a lot that happened in between, but do you want to talk about the differences between writing your first book and putting that out on paper and writing your blog and putting that out online? It must be a very different experience for you. And
it's different, Colleen, and I'm going to answer that in a kind of offbeat way. I'll talk about the social aspects of both. And you are an important influence in one of them, in that when you write, you write all by yourself. It's lonely. However, you and I both know there are writers groups out there, and you can join a writers group. And it's so wonderful getting out and meeting other authors, me to you and you to me. And I remember your reactions to my style at the beginning. You were very resistant.
Not me.
But yeah, that interplay is really, really nice. The blog is different. It's a different kind of sociability. It's huge. There are so many people who are involved with me in the blog, either helping me or reacting to things that I've written. Remember, it's every day I publish. And yeah, so the social aspects of them are very different. Writing is alone unless you take that step, which I think is critical to a writer. And I would say that to beginning writers too. Join the writers groups, even though they're going to laugh at your first offerings.
Hopefully they won't laugh.
They won't laugh. They might feel like laughing.
Won't.
I like the way you run your group. Everyone must say something good about everyone else. Find one sentence that 11 monkeys wrote. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Find one sentence that you can say something good about and make sure you say it or don't come back.
Right. Well, and it's important to know what you need to improve, but what did you do well, right?
Yes.
And so how do you feel like you've grown as a writer along that journey once you started inserting other writers into your process? Has that made you a better writer, and how?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Because everybody has a different reaction to what you wrote. And no matter how you conceive, well, I think people will react this way. No matter how you think, when you go with that group with 6 or 7 or 8 other authors, you get 7 takes on one sentence. You get 7 reactions, and wow, it's mind-blowing. It's really eye-opening, and then, you know, they correct a lot of things. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
For me, I wouldn't have advanced without the writers' groups. Of course, once you start with the syndrome, the idiom of writing and joining writers' groups, then there are other opportunities. There's Grub Street in Boston, where you can sign up for advanced writing classes and join in and start writing right away and getting more great feedback. And then there are, I'm sorry, there are groups where they will introduce you to agents, and you'll meet for a week. Everything you do for a week is determined by how you're going to present to agents. And then the last day, the agents come in, and you get a chance to talk with agents, and some of them want your manuscript, and that's a great piece. Lots of things writers can do.
Right. And I think, like, to your point, but the point is you have to be the one to get out there, right? No one's coming to you to pull it out.
Oh, yeah.
You have to kind of put yourself out there, whether you're comfortable with it or not.
Yes, we know. Adam was saying earlier how many, Ryan was, how many authors talk about how many agents turned them down. I mean, it's amazing.
It's part of the process.
Yes.
So you have another book here, Cooking in Real Life. What are the differences between these two? I'm guessing there's
Cooking in Real
recipes.
Life is my first try at writing. I had married for the second time. I had raised 3 boys, and they were all gone in college and adults. And I remarried and had a little girl, and in very short order, I lost all my money in a business venture that was badly conceived. I got divorced, and I was a single father of an infant girl. And talk about loneliness in terms of adult company. It was lonely. And I found myself at home a lot with a sleeping baby. And that's when I decided that maybe I could write a cookbook. And so I wrote a cookbook called Cooking in Real Life, with the idea that you weren't cooking for a dinner party, but you were cooking for a family. And I chose my favorite recipes, whether it's a hot fudge sauce or the Italo-American gravy with the meatballs and red sauce. I have a sushi recipe, clam chowder, the best you ever had. So that's what that book is.
Okay.
And that wasn't successful. And I didn't mean it. I couldn't get it on a national publication. But I meant locally, and even locally it didn't do well. As opposed to Dom's, with Dom's and Odyssey, I had a little bit of a flow in my writing style, and I began to really enjoy the writing. A cookbook isn't the same creative process as a fictional piece, or in this case, just a history.
Right. And so did you have the stories to go along with your recipes, or was it purely recipes?
No, there were stories in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's more stories in the Dom's
This is
and
all
Odyssey.
story.
And which
Yeah.
one came first?
Cooking in Real Life
Okay.
came, and good for me that it didn't discourage me.
Right.
And I wrote this, and I was delighted with it.
So, I mean, I think there's a few good points in here. One is that this is your first that you consider not a success, and yet I don't know that you would have been able to write the next one without having learned through this one.
Absolutely.
And then also there's the aspect of being a single parent and being a parent at all with a young child. And a lot of the writers we talk to is the struggle is making time to actually express yourself creatively, whether it's through writing or cooking or art. So can you talk a little bit about, because we haven't had a man's point of view on that, that, you know, men have that same struggle as fathers to try to create something that they're passionate about in their lives while they're raising a family and trying to make ends meet. So maybe talk about how that shaped a little bit of your creative process.
Oh, that's interesting. One thing I learned, this is not an answer to your question, but being a single father as opposed to a single parent is not a lot of fun, because when you take your baby to school, and I say baby, Catherine was 2 years and 10 months when I took her to her first school, and there are only women there. And you never bond with a group of women. You just don't. They have their own ways, their own chatter, they have husbands. There's a certain edginess about a man being with all women here. That was not so much fun. But I also had a lot of time, because when your baby's an infant, they sleep a lot. And I didn't have a partner that I spent time with, and I was never a television person. So writing was a wonderful way for me to fill a void. I didn't have to squeeze it in. And it always took dominance in my life, even after things started going for me, and I started relationships, and I got back into the mainstream. Writing started my day. I worked my day around my writing, and I still do now.
That's good. And so it sounds like writing was a great companion when you didn't have one.
It was.
And we do talk
Yeah.
a lot about sort of the emotional and the spiritual and the, mental health side of writing, and all of the ways that it can help you to express yourself creatively, but also help you mentally, emotionally connect with yourself and what your goals are in life. Do you want to talk at all? Did any of that weave its way into here, or is that more present in your blog these days?
No, I think you're right. I think it really is a wonderful outlet. It's a wonderful way to talk about things that are bothering you, and to see it come out on paper and to re-examine it, or even to present it to a writers group, it's really wonderful therapy, if nothing else. And also, I think it helps you think about your life. It helps you think about who you are and what you want to be, and you see yourself being written into the characters that you're creating. And yeah, it's a wonderful process.
All right. And
Whether it's successful, whether you sell a copy or not.
Right. And I think that's part of it as well, is what do you think is success on your own personal level? But reading your blog, not necessarily super recently, but maybe a month or so ago, and to go from life to death, how does death play a part in what you're motivated to write about, and just the realization of mortality in terms of creating art?
That's a good question, and I want to say my daughter, who's 20 now, she goes to school in Swarthmore, so I don't see a lot of her. But she always texts me, "Dad, stop writing about death." But I'm 77, and you get old, and you get slow, and things happen to you. I posted a video yesterday or the day before called, a door closing, meaning, in this particular case, it was my working out at the club. I've been lifting weights for 40 years, and suddenly I can't lift 85 pounds over my head, and maybe I'll never lift 85 pounds again. And so I like to record that, not in a
Morbid way.
not in a morbid way. Thank you. The word being 77 words escape me. Not in a morbid way, but as a way to face life, to face who you are today. Oh my gosh, I forgot all about this. So
Well, you're
sorry.
more modern than me.
So sorry. What a dope.
Hey, that makes for great television. That's real life barging in on you.
And while we're talking, I'll make sure I get it shut off here. So anyway, yeah, death plays a part, not in terms that I'm facing it. I'm really a healthy person. I'm very boring. I go to the doctor and everything's good. But I think it's important for us to look at death as part of the cycle that we go through, because we're all facing death. And some of us die very young and some of us not so young. So I like to put that in the blog when the occasion strikes me. So writing a blog every day, where do you find the material? And so it's got to be stuff that's close at hand. You can't stare out into space and say, what shall I talk about? You'll never get it done. It's got to be something. It's got to be the elevator being slow. It's got to be an ice cream cone leaking and dripping. It wasn't. Those small things are what you have to write about.
Right.
Death and your health being another one. Melatonin I wrote about. Melatonin is a hormone that your body naturally secretes and helps you sleep. My body doesn't secrete melatonin, so I have to take a couple of pills. And I like to write about that, the effect of my not knowing about melatonin and how I struggled with sleep, and then suddenly discovering it and what affected it. So these are the things I write about, and getting old is one of them.
Right. And I think another thing that you do well in your blog, and you're touching on really what makes good writing, which is your feelings, what's happening to you, and being vulnerable to share that. Now, if you're not necessarily at a certain stage of your life, but one of your readers is, you're great about bringing them in and letting their voice shine in your blog. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how you're able to do that so well, and what made that decision, and I don't know, about incorporating other people into your own experience.
Well, people, it's an honor for you. People are paying you an honor when they want to be part of it in one way or another. For example, one of the greatest honors for me was to get an email from you. Do you remember that? And you said, Dom, why don't you include a couple of words when you send the email out? I had just been sending out the link. And that idea really changed the blog every day. And then from there, later on, I added in a picture. And so now when people subscribe and they get the blog every day, they get a picture and they get a couple of words, and it's a richer piece. People comment on what I write about, and some of them disagree with me. But again, it's an honor. I don't care that they disagree. They want to be part of it. And so I put them in. And yeah, I love doing it. And it keeps them close. I like it.
They feel like they're part of the
They're
blog.
part of it. Yeah.
And I think that's art, right? Is people want to see themselves in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And
as
do a
an
great
artist,
job.
you love it. You thrive on your audience.
Right.
How are we doing for time?
We're doing pretty well. So I don't know if you want to talk about what you feel like if your life didn't have this blog. I mean, you're doing it every single day, which is a huge
550
undertaking.
days. Yeah.
What part of your life are you glad that you've done this? Are you feeling the burden of it, or what's the outcome in real life for you?
Honestly, I don't know what I would do without it. It has become remarkable for me. And of course, it's led to the videos, which I now incorporate in the blog, and now the podcasts. And this is worth mentioning, Colleen. I have a book, Conflicted, that I try to get agents to afford me representation. 60 of them, all turned me down. And so here is this manuscript, which you are familiar with, languishing, until my daughter says, Dad, start a podcast. And there we are. I'm now 2 weeks into the podcast. And my book, which has up till now been unread by anybody, is now being read by 22 or 23 people. And it's a number that's going to grow. It's inevitable. It will grow. It'll grow to 100. Imagine. For me, that has put a success label on my effort with that manuscript. Now, it's no longer unheard of. 100 people will be reading it. And if I bump into one of them, they'll hopefully want to talk about it. So it's critical to my life. I don't know what I would do without it.
Yeah, I think that's a great sort of way to start to wrap it up, but is that fulfilling feeling of expressing yourself and also being heard.
Yes.
That's important. So usually we like to end it on a note of inspiration. And so as a writer and having gone through your journey, your Odyssey, what would you say to writers at home, whether they're just starting out as trying to get motivated to write, or whether they've published their first book and they're trying to get into their second story, or what's some advice as a writer?
Well, when you think about whether you're a writer, ask yourself if you enjoy the writing. I mean, that is critical. You have got to really enjoy it. You've got to relish that time. You can't wait till you sit down and start writing. And if you have that drive, then officially you are a writer. And you start thinking of yourself as a writer, not as a beginning writer, not as an unpublished writer. You're a writer because you write, and you write purposefully. So just sit down, start writing, and start calling yourself a writer.
All right. Thank you so much, Dom.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in, and that's wonderful advice. And if anybody else would like to sit where you're sitting, they can visit www.theroomtowrite.org and come join us for the Journey of a Story series.
Today?
Today. Today is mañana. Thank you.